Josh, welcome to Shifting Culture. So excited to have you on. Thanks for coming on and joining me.
Thanks so much. I'm so looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I just want to start a little bit of where you start in your book. So you open the book
Yeah,
with some really personal stories of heartbreak,
definitely.
illness, some betrayal. How do those seasons, those different seasons in your life, shape your sense of whether God is really on your side or not?
Definitely, man. No, yeah. So, the book's called God is on Your Side, but that's like you're saying, that was really the heart behind it. Just going, man, what do we do in those seasons when it doesn't feel like, God, you're on my side, like you're really with me or for me? And so in my own life, I mean, there's been a variety of those seasons, but, a few just examples. I think when our daughter was 5 years old and she had a psychotic break and spent 10 days in the hospital and 6 months with specialists, and we thought we might have lost the girl that we loved to the moon and back. If we'd known her, they thought it might be permanent. And I found myself just going, man, God, are you really with us right now? Are you really for us? Because it feels like we're on our own out here. Or I had a season a few years back where I went blind in my right eye, and the doctors were concerned. They weren't sure what was causing it, and the concern was that it could be coming from my left eye as well. And so, like, you need to prepare yourself that you're likely going blind this next year. And it ended up not being the case. We determined the causation was different, but didn't know that for about a year. So I spent about a year just going, man, what's it going to be like if I can't see my kids' faces growing up, if I can't read and write the way I know how? And I mean, you can be blind and still live a great life, but I was reimagining just what my future looked like with everything I knew. I had myself going, man, God, are you really for me? Are you really with me? Are you really on my side right now? And even, the immediate context of the book, about 2 years ago, found myself in just kind of coming out of a brutal season. And for the first time in my life, wrestling with some suicidal thoughts even, and just going, man, the thought was that it would be better for your family and friends, those closest to you, if you just weren't around. And that was a lie from the enemy. It
Yeah.
wasn't true. But in the middle of that, I think just wrestling with, God, have you left the building? That's
Mm,
what it feels like right now. It feels
yeah.
like I'm on my own right now. And so, yeah, a lot of the heart of the book is going, man, where do we go when it feels like God's not on our side?
Yeah.
How do we grapple and navigate those kind of seasons?
You went to the book of John as one of the places that you found some solace in to say, hey, maybe God is on my side. And I find it through this book, this beautiful book, the beautiful gospel. Why the book of John? What is it for you that really shows us that God is with us?
Yes, definitely, man. So yeah, like you said, I went back to the Gospel of John because it's been kind of my favorite gospel. I think for a lot of people go, man, this is my favorite book
Yeah.
of the Bible. Or when someone becomes a new Christian, we'll often give them the Gospel of John. Like, hey, start here, because you just get this beautiful, clear portrait of Jesus, this picture of who Jesus is. But I've also found one of the things that's so beautiful about John is that you can be reading it for the first time, brand new to Jesus, and just everything's, man, popping. Like what I put it is, like, the waters are shallow enough for a brand new believer to wade in, right?
Yeah.
But it's also oceanic enough that you can be, now I'm a few decades into following Jesus, and I'm still like, there's depths in that ocean, man. There's like stuff that is still decades later, like lights turning on and popping. And so I found myself going back to the Gospel of John, one, because I'm like, I just need Jesus. I need a fresh vision and glimpse of Jesus right now. And because, man, all these things just started coming alive, where I think part of getting into those oceanic depths in John is seeing some of the ways that he's drawing Old Testament backdrops that help these famous scenes of what Jesus is doing pop in Technicolor, where it's like going, whoa, that's where those extra layers come in. And what I found for myself was John's Gospel, I focused in the book on these one-on-one encounters that Jesus
Hmm.
has with various individuals throughout John, because I saw myself in those
Mm,
encounters. It was like, man,
yeah.
I was the man who'd been paralyzed for 38 years encountering Jesus, offering to lift me up. I was the woman at the well, like encountering Jesus and being invited into life with him. I was Barabbas getting exchanged on the cross. Like, I was all of these characters, and I think that's actually part of John's design and intention, is not that we would just read this as kind of abstract history, but actually that we would find ourselves almost like scenes in stained glass windows or
Mm.
iconic mirrors, or something that we actually find ourselves in these stories, that we could encounter Jesus and see him seeing us in some of our most desperate seasons.
I want to. So as you're looking at these one-on-one encounters, I want to actually then also talk about the signs that John has in his gospel. And I want to go big picture just to
Mm,
set the stage of the book, the whole book of John. What do you think his intention is placing these signs? What do you think his core thesis and what is everything like moving towards?
great. Yeah. So John famously has these seven signs, and each one, I would suggest, I argue in the book, is a picture of the gospel. It's actually a picture of Christ's death and resurrection and what he's come to accomplish and bring.
Mm,
So, as an example, his very first sign, the wedding at Cana, it's interesting. Like it happens on the third day, we're told, and you're kind of
mm,
going, okay, third day of what, John? Third day of the week, third day of the year. It
yeah.
doesn't say. It's actually ambiguous, But I argue, I look throughout the book that John sets up each of his stories with these little clues, and so third day
Mm,
is a clue he uses throughout. You're about to see a resurrection scene. So on the third day, there's this wedding where Jesus, man, provides an abundance, crazy amount of wine, like 150 gallons, and it's like 750 bottles or so, something like that. And to a party that is already lit. I mean, they've been drinking for days. It's been a wedding feast. It's been whatever. You're going, Jesus, why are you making so much wine? What's going on here?
mm,
And but when you get the Old Testament backdrop, it's interesting here. Now, prophets like Joel and Amos, they talked about how when the Messiah comes, he's going to bring this abundance of
mm,
wine. So the prophet Amos, for example, said, man, when the Messiah comes, the mountains shall drip sweet wine and all the hills shall flow with it. I'll restore the fortunes of my people Israel. They'll rebuild the ruined cities, inhabit them. They'll plant vineyards and drink their wine. And it goes, and you're just going, man, this is about more than just wine. This is about restoration of the people from exile. This is about God bringing his people out of desolation, back into the land, back into abundance, back into his kingdom. And so I think Jesus is making all this wine, it's a picture of what he's come to bring through the gospel is this resurrection wedding
mm,
with all this wine.
mm,
And what it's interesting too, John tells us that the water Jesus uses for this miracle is from the Jewish rites of purification, these vessels that they would
mm,
use for purification rites. I think there's a picture of the gospel here too, that you used to get washed with water, but now you get washed with wine, right? Meaning in the old covenant, in the Old Testament, there were purification rites with water that we'd get washed with. But now in the
mm,
gospel, like actually Jesus's blood, the wine of his blood shed for us is what atones for our sin, cleanses us as his people, makes us fit
mm,
for the kingdom. And it's interesting at the end of John's gospel, in the crucifixion, when Jesus is being crucified, towards the end, there's a spear that pierces his side, and out comes blood and water. And I think there's stuff John's doing with the language he uses in that scene too, where it's like, I argue in the book, Jesus is the seventh vessel, right? Like he uses these six
mm,
vessels that represent the Old Testament covenant, water. But now Jesus is the seventh vessel who turns water into wine through himself. Like now the water of
mm,
his spirit, the wine of his blood shed is how we're washed and cleansed and made pure. And all this kind of comes to a head with the ending of the scene where the master of the banquet tastes the wine and says, "Oh my gosh, you've saved the best for last." Tells the bridegroom, "Man, most people bring out the good stuff first, and then they get to the 2 buck chuck and whatever at the end. But you actually brought the best stuff out at the end. What's going on there? Well, dude, this is a picture of the kingdom. Like Jesus, I think we have a picture of the master of the feast, like the father at the wedding feast banquet of his son and his church,
yeah.
his bride. Like goes Jesus, the father delights in the
Mm,
sacrificial love of the son poured out for his bride to accomplish this wedding. He
mm,
goes, this is better than all the Old Testament sacrifices, all the other stuff. You've saved the best for last. Like what Christ
mm,
has accomplished on the cross through his death and resurrection is this wedding feast of abundance and
mm.
restoration and union with his people. And the Father is celebrating and rejoicing. And so that's the first sign. And yeah, basically just go, man, I think throughout the book, I kind of look at each of the seven signs. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not just like, hey, cool party trick, Jesus. That's rad. What he's powerful. He can do that thing. It's like, no, he's actually orchestrating like a parable of the kingdom, a picture of what his death and resurrection
Mm.
accomplishes for the world.
Man, that actually makes me fall in love with the Bible even more, right?
Mm,
This story that moves from the beginning to the end, that is a cohesive story that bringing in elements from the end, some analogies and metaphors of what it looks like to live in the kingdom, what Jesus is going to do, is resurrection, like how we get to live now in the kingdom, what's going to come in the consummation. Like this whole story of the
mm,
Bible, just phenomenal. And
Mm,
every time I think of it as like a big story from beginning to end, I'm like, okay, I could find myself in it. This is when I know that God is on my side. There's a
mhm,
lot of times when people take, different verses, like one verse that says God is for you. And like, it's like, okay, that's a good truth, but it doesn't hit me like being part of the story hits me. So if I could find myself.
mm,
So how did you find yourself here in the man born blind? I'm going to take the
mm,
physical representation of you going blind in an eye,
yeah,
and then just as Jesus passes by this man who was born blind, who was blind from birth, and healing him. Like, where did you find yourself in that story? And how did you know that God was with you because of it?
definitely. Well, man, one of the things that was so really popped for me in that story where Jesus sees the man born blind is, as you mentioned, it says, it opens with, as he passed by, Jesus saw him. One of the things that struck me was like, dude, Jesus sees him before he sees Jesus.
Mm,
And Jesus sees him in his condition. And I found myself in the season of, with my the blindness in my right eye and this kind of processing and wrestling with, man, am I losing my vision? One of the questions, more metaphorically, in that was like, God, I can't see you right now. I don't know where you are. Like I'm really wrestling with, have you abandoned me, or what does this mean? Like, what? Not
mm,
only because of the physical condition, but also because I felt called to. I don't know. So, like, I think of like writing and reading, and
yeah.
those are kind of some core parts of stuff that I do. And I'm like, man, am I going to be able to fulfill what I feel called to do? Is that calling for me? And the fear
Mm,
of like, am I going to be able to see my kids' faces growing up? Some of those fears,
yeah.
and all that set up this place of going, God, I feel like I can't see you right now. I don't understand what you're out doing. And in this story, one of the things that was so powerful was like, dude, Jesus can see me even when I can't see him.
Mm,
Like that he
yeah.
sees us before we see him. And what struck me is says as he passed by. And that phrase passed by, you go into the Old Testament, like it's Greek in the New Testament, but the phrase, same phrase is used in the Greek version of the Old Testament. It's a famous phrase that shows up regularly for God's glory passing by. So you think of Moses, like, my glory is going to pass by you and hide you in the cleft of the rock, or Job, like in the midst of his suffering, and yet God's glory passes by. And so there's this imagery or this picture of Jesus is Yahweh in the flesh, the God of the Old Testament, come
Mm,
to save and deliver his people. His glory is passing by, and this guy can't see it yet, but
mhm,
Jesus sees him. Kind of like I found myself going, man, I feel like I can't see it yet. And
yeah.
yet you're for me, you're coming towards me,
Mm,
you're moving to me. And another thing that struck me was when Jesus heals the man, he rubs, puts the mud in his eye
yeah.
and the saliva and everything, and he tells him to wash himself in the pool of Siloam. And what hit me was after this man was healed, he still hadn't seen Jesus yet. Like he had to go wash the mud off and he's somewhere else. And so he still hasn't seen, he's encountered the presence of Jesus, but he hasn't yet seen Jesus face to face. And I feel like that's like a picture of all of us in some way. It's like,
Yeah.
man, we, New Testament church today, these days, like we've had a real encounter with Jesus through his
Mm,
spirit, his presence. He has encountered us, he's opened
yeah.
our eyes. And the pool of Siloam, I argue, it's a picture of baptism as well. And so we've been baptized, we've been washed by the Spirit, we've had our eyes opened by the presence of
Mm,
Christ, but we still haven't seen him yet face to face. And this guy's getting grilled and questioned by the leaders of the day, who did this and what's going on? And his testimony, though, is all he's got. He's like, I don't know who this guy. All I know is I once was blind and now I see. And I think similarly, like we're in a spot where even if we haven't seen Jesus face to face yet, we've encountered his presence. We've experienced the transformational work he's done in our lives. And John puts it elsewhere in Revelation, man, we overcome by the word of our testimony, the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. Like
yeah.
the blood of the Lamb, like what Christ has done, and the word
Yeah.
of our testimony, what impact that's had in our lives. And in short, man, I found myself in that season for that year. My theme verse became from the book of Job, where he says, man, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. And I
Mm,
found myself, I didn't get there day one, but over the
yeah.
next few months, I found God encountering me, working on me, bringing me to a place of heart of going,
Mm,
not just moving from what if to even if, from like, what if I go blind to even if I go blind,
Mm.
God, I will trust you. Though you slay me, yet will I trust you. And I don't know, man. Yeah, so I think that's one of the God often wants to do in those seasons is cultivate our trust and take us to a deeper level of trusting Him, not in spite of our circumstances, but even in the midst of it.
So, in the midst of circumstances, some people, in the midst of difficult circumstances, say, "Where are you, God? I don't sense your presence. I don't know that you're here." What helps you this presence, like that He's
Mm,
with you, like the withness of God? Even, I
mm,
know people go through the dark nights of the soul where, like,
mm.
God is far off and He feels
Yes.
far off, and question, is God really with me or not? How have you found His withness in those difficult places where He feels far off?
Yeah, that's great. Well, two different thoughts come to mind. I'll start with kind of the easier one and then move to the more in-depth one, So the first thing that comes to mind is, man, there's a practice that my wife and I like to use of listening prayer, right? Where we'll kind of like, when I'm feeling unsettled or something difficult's going on, or I feel confused or frustrated and all, it's kind of two phases in this prayer where the first one will be, Jesus, like, what's the lie or the fear? Like, what's the lie
Mm,
that I'm being told or the fear that I'm
yeah.
believing? And I'll take a moment, 30 seconds, a minute or so, bring that before the Lord and just take some time to listen.
Mm,
And often there'll be something that will surface, not always, but often. And then I'll take whatever that is and go, okay, well, Jesus, what's the truth that you want to speak into that? So to give an example, I remember this is some years back, but I woke up one morning and I had this thought just blaring in my head of, um, you're going to die soon. You're about to die soon. And I was
mm,
like, man, well, what's that? Where's that coming from? It was kind of out of left field, but it was like blaring really strong. I share the story more in the. So I went for a walk and I kind of brought that with the Lord. I was like, okay, what's going on? Where's this thought coming from? So, man, what's the lie, the fear? Where's this come from? And what began to surface, as just the Spirit surfacing for me, I had just finished this major ministry project that had taken quite a while. And there was this sense of going, okay, now that that's done, the Lord doesn't need you anymore. and, and
yeah.
and like and realizing I'm like, there's some
Mm,
stuff going on here. The lie underneath is, hey, God just wants to use you. He was just using
mm,
you to get that done. And now that
yeah.
that's done, he doesn't need you anymore. So I took that and I brought it before the Lord. I'm like, okay, well, Jesus, what's the truth that you want to speak in? And and very clearly the phrase I heard was, before I called you to use you, I called you to love you. Like I
Mm,
didn't, I
yeah.
didn't call you just to use you. I called you to love you, like you're my child. And the thing before broke. Like the
Mm,
power of
yeah.
whatever that thing was broke. And so often on, so maybe that's my first thought that comes to
Mm,
mind is uh, prayer, but specifically that's a method of prayer that my wife and I found really helpful for just bringing tough stuff before the Lord and we're going through it. But the second thought that comes to mind, and this is maybe more of the when life really hits the fan, like, so let's just say, for example, like 2 years ago when I mentioned my life blew up and there's a lot of loss, a lot of, God, where are you? The first time of really like suicidal thoughts and all. And
yeah.
for me, it was really a multifaceted approach for that next year where, uh, man, counseling, like getting in with a good counselor was huge. Community, having a close community of trusted
Mm,
friends that I could process and walk with. Medication, in my case, like, man, it was really helpful to get on some medication that helped as well. And the so I think just going, man, there was
mm,
no quick fix, like
yeah.
and I think also giving time for a process, because it was really about a year, especially 6 months, felt like dark night of the soul, about a year of just, because part of what was happening actually was I found God using my immediate circumstances to actually surface some really deeper layers from my childhood and deep stuff in my story that I didn't even realize. It's like, man, I thought I'd moved on from all that. I thought that was just in the past, and all this stuff starts getting dredged up. And I'm like, dude, I don't need to deal with I had enough this year to deal. I need to go back to that stuff. And that stuff was just coming like a train, like a
Mm,
freight train. And so what I found was like, man, underneath some of the
mm,
disillusionment and despair in that season was some deep level spiritual formation work that God probably did some of the deepest spiritual formation in my life, digging into layers of my childhood and life story and my personality and where that was all coming, all this stuff. And so I think there's even beautiful invitation in those seasons to go deep with God, but I don't want to sugarcoat that either and make it sound like that's like a quick fix or an easy overnight thing, because it was a
But
process.
it didn't sound like a quick fix or an easy overnight thing at all. Even when you were trying to maybe sugarcoat it, it wasn't sugarcoating at all. I think that God wants to do that over time because I think this is one of the things that God really likes to do, break cycles of fear, violence, oppression, trauma. And these are generational cycles that usually we pass on things generationally. And if we don't do that work of childhood work, like bringing things up, we're going to be passing on things that we've inherited as well that Christ wants to break us free from that, but not just break us
Mm,
free, but break generations free from it. And so I think it's pretty phenomenal. We often think, like in America, I think so individualistically, right? It's just about me, but it's actually he's doing bigger work than we actually think he is, even just in
yes.
our own little story. It's actually the next generation, and for people later on where there's going to be something more flourishing, and so that they could sit in the place where they know that they're beloved. And I think you write about, John's all about the belovedness of, being a beloved child of God, the one that, that Jesus loved. So belovedness is really important.
Mm,
So as you're looking at belovedness in John,
mm.
I think one of the places you pointed out is the story of the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. How did Jesus bring out the belovedness in her, and how can we start to sit in the belovedness of God?
Definitely, man. Well, I love this story, man. The woman at the well. It's a lot of people's favorite, John chapter 4. And maybe my first observation in terms of the Old Testament backdrop again, right? That I think helps
Yeah.
us even pop at a bigger level is the well, like the location that they meet. And if you kind of go, oh man, where's the well? Well, in the well is the location where the groom meets the bride. And so we see
Mhm.
this in places like Genesis 24. It's where Rebecca is discovered for Isaac. It's where Jacob first locks eyes with Rachel in Genesis 29. It's where Moses and Sipporah meet in Exodus chapter 2. And so the leading Jewish scholar, Robert Alter, he's a famous, influential leading Jewish scholar, refers to the well as a like a Hebrew type scene for the location where the groom and the bride first meet. And he gives like 5 key characteristics of these scenes. So the first one is that the future groom journeys to a foreign land. And we see Jesus doing that here in John chapter 4, going through Samaria. The second one is there he encounters a girl at a well, and that happens here with Jesus and the woman. Third one is one of them draws water from the well. There's this whole discussion in John 4 about the water getting drawn. A fourth one is the girl rushes home with news of the stranger's arrival. And that happens. The Samaritan woman runs back and tells everyone, "You got to come meet this person." And the fifth one is a betrothal is concluded after he has been invited to a meal. So that, and we see that picture here where Jesus is then invited by the Samaritans to stay for a couple of days and to feast with them, right? And so, well, what's going on here? Well, I'm not saying that anything literally romantic is happening between Jesus and this woman, but I am saying that John is narrating this story. I think it's a real encounter. Jesus encounters this woman, but
Mhm.
John is narrating the details. I think Jesus is even orchestrating what's happening here as a window into a greater reality, kind of this
Mhm.
picture of
Yeah.
Christ encountering the church as his bride. And which is interesting. We talk about this theme of being beloved, right? As the church being beloved of Christ. And a few things that we see about the belovedness of the church in this story, I think, is well, as a picture of the church, Jesus crosses all these boundaries to get to us. Like he's crossing all these boundaries. In John 4, he's crossing boundaries of
Mm.
ethnicity, of socioeconomics, of religious boundary. Like he's crossing all these divides that Jews and Samaritans hated each other, dude. And Jesus is crossing everything he can to get to his beloved. And I think in the bigger picture, Jesus is the one who's crossed the greatest boundary from heaven to earth to get to
Yeah.
us, like to be with us, to be on our side. And the Samaritan woman, I think, is a pretty fitting picture of the church as well. Because, like her, the church is part Jew and part Gentile. Like Samaritans were Jewish and Gentile. And that's a major theme in the New Testament. The church's identity is Jew and Gentile. Like her, we are from the wrong side of town. We encounter Jesus as one, again, who journeys from a far off place, from a distant land, from heaven to earth to meet us. And not just to like have a one off encounter and leave again, but actually to be united with us forever as his people, And so, yeah, as we can talk more, but I think that picture for me is so
Mm,
powerful of this scene as a picture of us encountering Christ as his beloved. And one other theme that comes up here with kind of the Old Testament backdrop again is we're told that she had 5 husbands in the
mhm.
past, and the person she's with now is not her husband. Well, on a symbolic level, in the Old Testament, I kind of argue throughout the book that every number is significant. I think every number is
Yeah.
echoing something here.
Mm,
And a number of commentators have observed how she's a fitting representative for Samaria and the
mm,
Samaritans, because in the Old Testament, Samaria was the northern kingdom of Israel. And when they were invaded by Assyria, basically they were invaded by 5 cities who brought their 5 male gods and planted them in Israel. And so part of the history of Israel is leaving. It would have been described by Old Testament prophets as adultery with these 5 foreign male gods. Like they're cheating on Yahweh with these other. That's in 2 Kings 17 that this all gets narrated. And like that, I think you say that we as the church, we have had many other lovers. We've been both,
yeah.
there's been gnarly things done to us by the powers of the world, and then we've given ourselves over to other things as well and chased
Mhm.
after these other things. And so I think that becomes a picture of man, now in Jesus, we've encountered what I call in the book, Jesus, the 7th husband, right? You have these, so Samaria, you have the 5, and then you have the one now she's with now who's not currently her husband. And
Yeah.
scholars have seen that as a picture of she's now kind of with Yahweh,
Hmm.
but not fully in the covenant, like married and all,
Yeah.
But now the 7th, Jesus has come, and him, like, dude, she's leaving behind all those other 5 husbands. Yeah, Samaria is called to leave behind the 5 idols. We as the church, we're leaving
Mm.
behind the gods of the nations, the idols of the powers, all those other things, to be united to Jesus in covenant with him as his people and his bride. So man, we're beloved. We're beloved.
We are beloved. We are beloved, but we forget it, right? We forget our
Yes.
belovedness, and then we go off and we cheat on Jesus
Yes.
with all of the powers of this world. Usually, it's money,
Yeah.
sex, and power, right? And then we
Yes.
cheat
Totally. Mm.
on Jesus with throughout history, and it happens over and over again. And the beautiful thing about Jesus is he calls us back and
Yeah.
says, "I still want you, and you are still my beloved, and come back to me," and calls us back.
Yes.
And
Totally.
I think that's beautiful, even when we consistently do him wrong
Yeah.
in the church. We just do him wrong all the time. So I'm so
Yeah.
glad that he
Well,
calls us back.
thanks, definitely, man. Yeah, and I love that, like, even that image of the well. So I went recently. This is about 2 weeks ago. I was in town here walking. I walked back by the place where I first proposed to Holly, my wife, and it just brought back
Yeah,
this flood of emotions, all the memories,
yeah,
and I feel like the well in John chapter 4 is almost like it's going back to the
yeah.
place where you first met, and we have all these iconic scenes of first encounters in our culture, like, I don't know, when Harry met Sally, or, the place where the couple kind of meets and sees each other becomes this classic scene, or Romeo and Juliet by the fish tank and whatnot. But in my own life, and I think in our lives, like, there's an
Mm,
invitation here when we do forget our belovedness and we run off to these other places, we have things happen to us, to go back to the place where we first met Christ, to
mm,
recount our story and
yeah.
celebrate that story. And he's there to meet with us again,
Mm,
And I love, like you mentioned too, one last thought here on this is the beloved theme is like you mentioned a minute ago, how John refers to himself throughout the gospel as the beloved disciple. And that's amazing to me. Like, I kind of go, I had a friend ask me once, he's like, man, what do you want put on your tombstone? Like, when you die, that's a morbid question. He's like, when you die someday, like, what do you wish your legacy would be? And I feel like for John, this is like what he's got on his tombstone. It's like, dude,
yeah.
I was loved by Jesus. Like, love it. That's the most important
Mm,
thing I'm not
yeah.
going to use my name. Like, the more
Yeah.
important than my own name is that Jesus has seen me, known me,
Mm,
called me, loved me. And that's actually a major theme where the name David, for example, in the Old Testament, literally means beloved. It's the Hebrew word for beloved. So whenever Israel's celebrating King David, the son of David, all that, they're saying King beloved, son of the beloved. Like,
mm,
when, like, Song of Songs, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. And Israel
mm,
saw themselves in this relationship with God as his beloved. So King David was the beloved of God. Israel saw themselves beloved of God.
mm,
Jesus, when he's baptized, the Father says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm
Mm.
well pleased." Jesus hasn't
Yeah.
even done anything yet. He hasn't done his ministry
Yeah.
yet. And so I think the reality is we're invited in Christ as the church to find our deepest core identity
Mm.
as the beloved of God.
Mm.
And when that happens, you're not starting from the good stuff I've done or the bad stuff I've done
Yeah.
or whatever. Like, you're starting with who God is towards you, and that just
Yeah.
changes the game.
Yeah. One of the people that Jesus really loved was Lazarus. There's
Mm,
a very small group of scholars, some people, they argue that Lazarus actually wrote the book of John. And
yes,
that and that because he was the beloved, that Jesus loved him, was a great friend, which I think is kind of fun to think about. I don't know if
yeah,
it happened, but it's fun to think about that he's there. And a lot of John takes place around Lazarus and where he was
yeah,
from, and the other gospels don't actually have those things in there. So it is an interesting thing that some people think that Lazarus wrote John. Uh,
totally. That's so interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah,
it's
and
crazy.
I've seen some of the scholarship on it. I'm like, oh man, that's intriguing. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's worth
it kind
reflecting
of is.
on.
But when you looked through John, you looked at that story. What stood out to you with the story of Lazarus, the raising of Lazarus there?
Totally. Well, a couple things. One piece that really I'd never seen before was how, so I argue in the book that John 10, where Jesus talks about himself as the good shepherd, and John 11, with the raising of Lazarus from the dead, are meant to go together. Like, they're actually
Yeah.
paired together. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff here where, for example, in John 10, Jesus is talking about himself, like, I'm the good shepherd, my sheep know my voice. I call them out of the pen and they come out. He also says, I am the gate for the sheep, and so they can come out. And in context, so kind of setting the stage for Lazarus in a second, right? But in the context, in Jesus being the good shepherd, is back in Ezekiel, it's 34, Ezekiel 34, where God is confronting bad shepherds, leaders of God's people who
Hmm.
are mistreating, abusing, like,
Yeah.
horrible. But he holds out this hope that the day's coming when I myself will come and shepherd my people.
Mm.
So I think subtext here, Jesus is going, that day is here. Like, there are a lot of bad
Yeah.
shepherds out here who've been mistreating my sheep, but now I, as the good shepherd, have come,
Mm.
and my sheep know my voice, and I myself, I am Yahweh in the flesh, come to redeem and to care for and shepherd and guide my people. Now, in the Lazarus story, a lot of the same language and imagery is used that Jesus was using in the Good Shepherd stuff. So the Good Shepherd calls his sheep by name. Jesus calls Lazarus by name. Lazarus, come out.
Mm.
I am the gate for the sheep. I am the resurrection and the life. Like, Lazarus is raised from the dead through Jesus,
Yeah.
through his power as the resurrection and the life. I think there's Exodus imagery that's used here as well, where depiction of that says that Lazarus was, I mean, it's been a little bit, so I'm trying to remember for sure, but like that Lazarus is bound in the grave clothes. Like, the picture, like,
Hmm.
dude, these are
Yeah.
like chains that he's bound in. And so now the ultimate bad shepherd, death, Satan, the dominion of evil, like,
Mm.
Jesus is coming, and he's the good shepherd who's breaking that gate open. He's calling Lazarus, his sheep, out of the
Mm.
tomb,
Yeah.
out into the open pastures of life with him. And here's one
Mm.
final thought is set up is it's kind of a big one though, is I argue in the structure of John that so John 5 to 10,
Mm.
really 5 to 11 are a unit, right? And so John 2 to 4 has a certain structure, and then in John 5 opens where Jesus is at the sheep gate. And then in John 10, Good Shepherd, he says, I am the gate for the sheep. And everything in this section is against the backdrop of Israel's wilderness wanderings. And so there's Israel getting manna in the wilderness, John 6, Israel getting water in the wilderness, John 7. There's Israel being led by light in the wilderness, John 8 and 9. There's God shepherding his people in the wilderness, John 10.
Yeah.
And all that to say, when you get to Lazarus, um, you've got now Exodus imagery of God calling his people
Mm.
out of
Yeah.
Egypt, out from the tomb,
Yeah.
out into life with him. And um, it's like the seventh sign, right? And all through the Gospel of John thus far, he's been giving these six
Mm.
prior signs that are all about Jesus' death and resurrection. Now in John 7, we see John in Lazarus, we see the seventh sign,
Yeah.
the clearest. hey, here's what I've come to do, man. My death and resurrection is going to raise you from the dead. It's going to knock
Mm,
open that gate and call out my people as my sheep into my open pastures.
mm. It's beautiful. I mean, I love that. And that he's calling us out into open pastures, that we are the sheep. It's so great. As you move then out of the raising of Lazarus, then into the raising of Jesus himself, and you talk about anticipating hope, that
Mm,
there is some surprises and anticipating surprises. This morning, some spiritual direction. My spiritual director told me to look for God surprises. I
mm,
mean, that's one of my assignments coming out of spiritual direction this morning, is to look for
wow.
these surprises. And I want to know is, how do you anticipate surprise in the midst of darkness, of when there is Saturday and you
Yes.
have nothing, it's dark, you feel like the enemy has lied to you, said nobody needs you, God isn't with you, your family doesn't need you. How do you anticipate surprise and, like, hey, hope may be coming?
Yes, definitely. Well, so in the story here, in John 20, it's the first story of Jesus' resurrection in John's gospel. And I love it how it opens where it's dark on the third day. In the dark, Mary went to the tomb. And I think about that, how Mary is going to the hard place.
Mm,
She's will make the journey in the dark to the difficult
yeah.
place where what she loves was lost. I mean, Jesus has
Mm,
been her everything, her deliverer, like her hope, all that has now been destroyed by the crucifixion. And so for Mary, it's probably like the darkest spot she's ever been in. All hope is
yeah.
lost. And yet she still has the courage to go to the tomb, to go to the hard place, to go to
Mm,
where what she loves was lost. And I see that as
mm,
something powerful, like in our own lives. Like I'm tempted, to ignore the hard places, to
yeah.
avoid going to the difficult. So even in my own difficult season, I shared earlier about 2 years ago and going through the year of counseling and processing
Yeah.
stuff, I felt like that was, in a sense, it was going to the tomb. It was going to the area where,
Yeah.
man, it feels like Jesus is gone. It feels like I'm
Yeah.
in dark night of the soul. And God, it seems like you're not around anywhere. I can't see
Yeah.
you. I don't know where you are. It feels like all hope is lost. I feel like I
Mm,
really knew you, but now I don't know where I'm at. And I think for a lot of us, for people, it takes courage in the dark night of the soul to go to the tomb, to not just kind
mm,
of run to trying to medicate or entertain, or by medicate, I mean, with drugs or, addictions or behaviors that are not going to be healthy for us. We can easily avoid or just trying to get sucked up in entertainment or ignoring or distracting. I think a lot of that we're avoiding grief, and yet
mm,
to go to the tomb is to go to some of those hard places in our life where God feels absent or what we love has been lost, and to sit with that. And yet what Mary encounters when she goes to the tomb, and I think John is depicting Mary here as well as a representative of the church in the
mm,
scene. Mary goes and encounters not only the resurrected Christ, but I love this image where she goes in the empty tomb, and in the tomb we're told that on the slab where Jesus' body lay, there's an angel at the head and an angel at the foot. Well, that's an interesting Old Testament echo, where that's like the Ark of the Covenant, dude, where what you had in the Holy of Holies, in the most holy place, you had the Ark of the Covenant had the angel at the head and the angel at the foot, and the blood was spilled, was shed, was put on the Ark of the Covenant to atone for the people's sin. And it was seen as the resting place for God, like God's footstool, God on his holy
mm,
throne, resting his feet on there. And okay, what's the point here? Well, I think the symbolism here is saying that the hard place has become a holy place.
mm,
That now the spot where Jesus' crucified body lay has now been transformed through the power of his sacrifice into a place where the power and presence of God, his reconciling, restoring presence, is now coming out of here to redeem and restore the world, you know?
mm.
And on a macrocosm level, on a big level, it's going, dude, the hard place has become a holy place. Like Jesus is the crucifixion. This is like ground zero for where everything blew up and went down. And yet it's now becoming the place through which God is reconciling and restoring creation and humanity
Mm,
to himself in and through Christ. But on a microcosm level, I'd
mm,
say for Mary herself, as a picture of the church, she goes to the hard place where it seems like God is absent, and yet encounters there that the hard place has become a holy place where she meets
Mm,
with the glorified, resurrected Christ.
mm,
And I can attest in my own life that part of what happened, part of what I experienced in going to the hard place with counseling, with friends, with processing, with not avoiding or ignoring. And there were times where I wanted to avoid, ignore, and but going, God wouldn't let me, man. He kept bringing me back into the hard place. Going into those hard places became places of some of the deepest, most intimate encounter
mm,
with God on the other side,
yeah.
you know? And so that phrase you mentioned, you say anticipate surprise. I think because of the resurrection of Christ, part of what the resurrection means is that on our own personal microcosm levels, right? We can take courage to go to the hard places of our lives, to go
Mm,
to the memories, the wounds, the hurts, the scars, the
mm,
places that it could be easier to avoid. And yet, when we go to those hard places, I believe that part of the significance of the resurrection that Christ loves to encounter us there. It may not be overnight. It may take some time. It may be a season, but that Christ loves to
mm,
encounter us there, and that the power of Jesus can transform our hard
mm,
places into holy places where we most deeply encounter the presence of the living God.
mm. How beautiful. Those hard places could be holy places, then we could actually go there. That's such a beautiful description of what happens there on the micro level. And on the macro level, you talk about as the place where Jesus starts to redeem and restore all things and renew all things through himself at that level. But we also get to participate in this, which is strange and weird that he says, come along with me. And we get to participate in this kingdom work to restore and renew all things on earth, which is incredible. Thank
Hmm.
you, Jesus, that
Yeah.
you invite us along. But he's inviting Peter along when he
Mm.
restores Peter. So the restoration of Peter. This is my favorite story in all of Scripture. So I want
Mm.
to get into it. And I think it might
Yes.
be my favorite story because at the end, before Jesus ascends, he just wants to have a barbecue on the beach with his friends. So it just gives me an excuse to barbecue over an open flame and hang out with my friends. But
Yes.
but other than that, just this beautiful restoration that we just see on this level of Peter. What's happening in the story that may be surprising to us that we may not have recognized and seen, even as you said something about like bringing all people in, like it is a little surprising some of the stuff that you said. So
Wow.
what would be surprising here?
Definitely, yes. Like you said, man, I love the story. Jesus is busting out the Traeger grill and he's cooking up a
That's
feast and grilling and making it happen. But yeah, so big picture, I think what Jesus is doing here is he is walking Peter through some of his painful memories in order to redeem and restore them, right? And so the first part of the scene, disciples have been fishing all night. It's in the dark, and I think there's even some symbolism here. It's darkness, the boat is out hovering over the waters. I think there's echoes of
Mm,
Genesis 1 here of like the spirit hovering over the
yeah.
waters, darkness, having no catch anything. But then there's the light breaks and the voice, the word of God goes forth over the waters. And
Mm,
Jesus says, hey, cast your nets
mm,
on the other side. So they do. They have this miraculous catch of 153 fish. Like boats are full, right? And what's going on here? Well, a couple thoughts. First off, so we have Jesus is reinstating Peter's calling, right? And so
yeah.
a lot of the details in the scene echo when Jesus first called Peter. Now, this is
Yeah.
in Luke's gospel, but I believe John, many scholars would say it's written last, and he's drawing off of the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, like as common knowledge, right? And so some of the themes that happen in Luke's gospel is Jesus does the same thing. Hey, throw your nets to the other side. They have this miraculous catch of fish, and so much so that in Luke, the nets are breaking, the boats are going under, they can't hold this massive catch. And then Jesus calls Peter, follow me and I'll make you a fisher of men.
Yeah.
So the miraculous catch of fish earlier in Peter's life, it's a sign of his calling to go and gather in the nations, to be an evangelist, really, to bring the
Yeah.
gospel. And now he's going to become a fisher of men, like bringing people to encounter Jesus, right? Well, why? John tells us here in John 21, he says the nets were not torn. They have this massive catch of fish, but he goes, even still, the nets were not torn. Why does he include that? Well, if you remember the earlier story where the nets were torn, there's a sense, well, when Jesus first called Peter, he wasn't ready for the gathering of the nations that was coming, right? Like he and the church, you have the church like the boat, like Peter and the church were not yet ready. Peter and the disciples were not yet ready for the miraculous catch of fish, the ingathering of the nations
Mm.
that God was going to bring. They still needed 3 years with Jesus, walking with him. He still needed to go through the death, Jesus' death and resurrection. He had to go through his own failure and so on. There was a lot he had to go through, but now Jesus is reinstating him, and Pentecost is about to come. And when
Yep.
Pentecost comes, dude, Peter's going to lead the gathering of the nations. Dude, there's going to be a miraculous catch. Every nation, tribe, and tongue is like entering into the kingdom, and Peter's going to get the helm of the ship. And now the nets will not break, the boats will
Mm.
not sink. Like the church is ready, and so
Wow.
I think there's a picture here of Peter's evangelistic calling. Which, okay, side note, it's really interesting. He says 153 fish.
Yeah.
What's going on with that number, right? Well, I kind of argue, make the case every number in John is significant, and I
Yeah.
think here there's one other place in the Bible where the number 153 shows up, and it's back in Second Chronicles 2, verse 17, where King Solomon. It's like the glory days of Israel, and King Solomon says he took a census to find out all the Gentiles, all the non-Israelites
Yeah.
who were residing in the land. Basically, the Gentiles who'd been gathered into the kingdom, right? And the number was 153,000.
Wow.
It's like 150,600, right?
Wow.
And similar here, I'd say the 153 fish, it's
Mm.
echoing that
Yeah.
one. Dude, Jesus is like the new greater Solomon, dude. He's bringing in now, ushering in the glory days of God's
Wow.
kingdom. And there's going to be this miraculous catch and ingathering of the Gentiles. And the
Wow.
nets won't break, the boat will hold. So, man, for me, that was like, whoa, mind blowing, right? But to your original question, what's Jesus doing here? I think he's reinstating Peter's calling.
Yeah.
And not only that, he then walks Peter through his biggest failure. And so the next thing, Jesus is cooking the fish over a charcoal fire. And
Yeah.
there's one other place that term charcoal fire shows up. And it's earlier in John's gospel when Jesus is going to be crucified and Peter is outside warming his
Mm.
hands by the charcoal fire and denies
Mm.
Jesus 3 times, right?
Yeah.
And so when Peter smells the charcoal fire, that scene, like, dude, it's evoking those memories. I think part of what
Mm.
Jesus is doing here, it's like,
Yeah.
I went recently to showing my kids the house I grew up in.
Mhm.
And the new owners happened to be home. And so we stopped out front and they're like, oh, what's up? Like, hey, I grew up in this house. Oh, do you want to come inside? I'm like, oh my gosh. So we walk back in. And as I'm walking my kids through each room, it's like, dude, oh, this is where we snuck out, TP'd our neighbors. This is where my mom used to cook spaghetti, and all like being in those places, smelling
Yeah.
the smells in the yard, the smells, the sights, the location, the sound. It's evoking all of these memories.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
similarly, I think that's what Jesus is doing here. It's like, dude, the catch of fish, the charcoal fire, it's evoking these memories for Peter of
Yeah.
the calling that he thinks he's lost, of his failure that Jesus is out to redeem and restore. And yet Jesus is walking him back into those memories, not to guilt him, not to shame him, he's walking him back into those painful places,
Wow.
redeem and to restore and to bring him into his calling. I think that's what Jesus does in our life. He'll take us back into those hard places, but it's not to shame us or guilt. It's
Mm.
to redeem and heal and restore and make us whole. Yeah.
So good. So good. Let's live into this restoration. He's bringing that redeeming, restoring us. It's great. God is on your side. A fantastic book. If you talk to your readers, what hope do you have for this book?
Man, definitely. My biggest hope would be that in our darkest seasons, like when the grenade goes off, your world blows up, we're all going to have seasons where just stuff hits the fan and it feels like, man, God, where are you? In that season, that we could lift our eyes to the gospel, to Jesus, and find, man, he is the God who's on our side. He's the creator who's entered
Yeah.
onto our side of creation to be with us. He's the savior who stepped onto our side as the guilty ones. He was innocent to fight for us on the cross. And he's the risen and ascended one who's bringing his side of heaven onto our side of earth in us and through us. And so my hope for readers would just be that we could gain that greater confidence in going, even in the hard places, perhaps especially the hard places. God is with you, he's for you, and he's ultimately on your side.
Amen. A couple quick questions here at the end I like to ask. One, if you go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think it would be, you don't need to be smart enough or nice enough to be okay with God. It's a longer story. I go into the book. Part of this last season was realizing, man, how much I, without even knowing it, had learned. This is how I belong. If I could be smart enough, be nice
Mm,
enough, I'll belong, have a place on the table. And part of what God's done this last season has been to go, yeah, your belonging is not based on
mm,
that. It's based on my love for you, which is independent of, that.
that's so good. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
Oh man, great question. Dang. Man, I'm always reading a ton. I'm trying to think of what's been the best lately. I'm currently reading a guy named Newman, an older guy on like a development of doctrine, which is great, but it's kind of boring. Actually, I think that's the book I was reading last night. I think most folks are probably bored with that. So, yeah.
Uh, anything else? Come on, give me something something else that you've been reading.
Yeah, definitely, man. Oh, let's see what. So I've been reading. Actually, I've been reading a couple books by Mary Carr. So for those who don't
Hmm.
know, so this is not
Yeah,
theology or whatever, but she's famous for a memoir. And
yeah,
so I recently read her book on how to write memoir, not because I'm wanting to write memoir per se, but just it's been
yeah,
really fascinating, kind of how she processes her own. One thing she's really famous for is going into hard parts of her own story and yet processing those with a lot of humility, but also a lot of honesty and
yeah.
that. And so currently reading now her third memoir, Lit, which is her life, which has been really good. So I don't know. I guess that's been
Awesome.
some fun
Yeah,
reading lately. Mhm.
great. That's good.
Oh,
Well, God,
I'll do one more
yeah,
actually. I'm sorry, one
yes,
more.
one
Yeah.
more.
So my
Good.
daughter and I, we just got back last week. We did a 10-day road trip down to California. My
Mm,
daughter's 15. She's got her permit. And so she's preparing to drive. She drove the
yeah.
whole trip. She's preparing to get her license. And we did an audiobook on the way down there, Unbroken by Laura
Mm,
Hildebrand. It's the
yeah.
story of Louis Zamperini. About 10 years old. I'd never read it, but a couple of people recommended it. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, it's so good. Like, just the book opens where it's a true story. His plane got shot down, 46 days surviving on a raft in the Atlantic Ocean. So the story opens, he's on this raft, underneath the raft, fighting off hundreds of sharks as like a plane overhead is like shooting bullets in the water trying to get it. It's like a survival resilience story. It was amazing. Yeah, so
Whew. Awesome.
good.
Awesome. That's a great recommendation. Josh, God is on your side. It's available anywhere books are sold. It's great. Is there anywhere you'd like to point people to? How could they connect with you? Is there anywhere you'd like them to get the book?
Oh, that's awesome. I'm on Instagram primarily these days. I have a website, joshuaryanbutler.com. So just my full name. And yeah, it's out there anywhere books are sold. If you want to support Powell's Books, my local here in my hometown here, they're a good big one you can order from. But yeah, it's out there wherever books are sold.
Awesome. That's one of the reasons I would want to move to Portland is Powell's book.
Mm.
I
Have you
love
been there
Powell's
before?
books. I
Oh my
have.
gosh.
It is amazing. I grew up about 3 hours north in just
Yes.
south of Tacoma. So I've
Awesome.
been to Portland many times and I love it. But Powell's Books is one of my
Oh
favorites.
man,
My
yeah, it's like
favorite
a whole
bookstores.
square
So
block, like 4 stories tall. It's
it's
the
pretty
land of
amazing.
books.
Yeah, it's good. Well, Josh, thank you for letting us know that God is on our side. Thank you for diving deep into the book of John. Let us know some of these Old Testament echoes and these one on one encounters Jesus has with people and in the signs that John has laid out for us. So that points to the death and resurrection of Jesus, that he could
Mm,
now then come and redeem and restore all things. And not just on a macro level, he could do it for us on a micro level as well. And that we
mm,
could find hope in him, that he is for us, he is with us always, even if we don't feel it, even if we don't feel his presence, he is still with us and he's still for us. So thank you, Josh. It was
mm.
fantastic.
Thanks so much, Joshua. Great. Awesome. Have a great day.